So, you have to take that into account. If blood glucose, the way I see it is this: if I can manage my blood glucose levels to the point where I'm pretty much in range 95% of the time, I'm lean, I manage my stress, I sleep well, I eat a colourful diet, I eat a mixture of different protein sources, I get my essential fats in, I learn and read a lot to understand what's going on within my body, I connect with other like-minded individuals, then I'm doing pretty damn good.
That was former pro bodybuilder and international nutrition and fitness expert Phil Graham, and this is the Bravest Podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Bravest Podcast. For those of you who are new to the show, I'm Craig, and I'll be your host as I take you on a journey each episode to learn from the most remarkable people in the world of diabetes health and wellness. The goal is to help you overcome any obstacles that might fall across your path and help you create the healthiest version of yourself possible. Now, this episode features former pro bodybuilder Phil Graham. And what you'll see through our conversation is that Phil is probably one of the most dialed-in fitness professionals you'll ever learn from. In this episode, Phil takes us on a trip through his early years growing up in Northern Ireland, where he led the life of an overweight teenager until he started to experience some of the telltale signs of diabetes, including significant visual disturbances. Phil describes an appointment with his doctor where he was exposed to information that really set him full of fear. He describes the conversations and the visuals like the belief that all people with diabetes will lose their eyesight or eventually have amputations. Now, that fear served as a motivator and a catalyst to take him from teenage video gamer to a newly diagnosed type 1 who devoured health and nutrition information to help him learn more about his condition and ultimately carve his physique in the gym. Over the years, Phil has filled his arsenal with various academic credentials, including a degree in nutrition from Queen's University Belfast, a postgrad diploma in public health promotion, and becoming a certified sports nutritionist with the International Society of Sports Nutrition. Phil also competed in Junior Mr. Northern Ireland, Mr. Universe, and Mr. Britain. Now, since his competing days, Phil has focused his sights on coaching, on training, and counseling countless fitness professionals and competitors around the globe. All of these experiences and work culminated in the release of Phil's new book, which is the Diabetic Muscle and Fitness Guide. Now, this conversation is deep in science and nutrition at times, but that is what is so amazing about Phil. While there are tons of wellness professionals out there trying to sell us on the quote-unquote latest and greatest products, Phil is only selling knowledge. Knowledge that he has gained from his many hours researching and studying peer-reviewed papers, as well as his significant dedication to studying his own body through training for some of the most competitive bodybuilding events on the planet. Now, I learned a lot from Phil in this short conversation, and unfortunately I could not keep him on the line for a longer period of time because he had a prior commitment. So if you guys like this one, please let me know, and what I'll do is I'll get some questions from you, and if you want Phil to address them in the future, I'm sure I can get him back on the show for another round. Okay, so before we get into our conversation with Phil, this episode is brought to you by the new apparel company with a big purpose, which is called Greater Than. I am very excited about this new collaboration. Now, earlier this year, Stephen and Jen Kramer learned that their 6-year-old son had type 1 diabetes. And although the diagnosis was clearly a shock to them, their hearts told them that they needed to do something to make a positive impact on the world. They needed to use their new experiences to help others feel like they had power despite any challenges they might have faced. So they created and launched the apparel company Greater Than. Now, Greater Than is a lifestyle brand dedicated to empowering all individuals. They believe, and they want you to believe, that whatever your challenge might be, you are definitely greater than that challenge. Now, because of the personal impact resulting from the recent diagnosis of their son, their first campaign focuses on the type 1 diabetes community, and it's branded Greater Than 1. So the cool thing about all of this is that not only are they designing an apparel line, which includes things like baseball hats and shirts that really look amazing, but with every purchase of Greater Than products, a portion of each sale will be donated directly to type 1 diabetes research and support. And guess what? If you go to their website, which is www.imgreaterthan.com, if you order up some gear and use the code BRAVEST on checkout, you'll get 10% off your order just for saying you heard about them on the podcast. So don't hesitate, don't wait. Go over to imgreaterthan.com, get some Greater Than gear, and support an amazing cause. So again, imgreaterthan.com, and don't forget to use the code BRAVEST for 10% off your entire order. All right, all that said, this is my conversation with the man himself, Mr. Phil Graham.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much micro detail we could get into. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, so look, why don't we dive into it? I think that this is great.
Sure thing.
So Phil, I want to thank you very much for doing this. I've been following you for some time online. I've been watching your videos and learning from really all the incredible content that you've been releasing into the world. And I've personally learned a lot from you, so I'm happy that you agreed to come on the show and share your knowledge with everyone who's listening today. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me on, Craig, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to record me. I know how much time and effort these podcasts take, and a massive credit to you for bringing this to the diabetic world.
Oh, I appreciate that. You know, it's definitely a labor of love, and I think that just in the short time that I've been doing it, the amount of impact that we're making through this medium is pretty remarkable, and it's great to have all of the feedback that I've been seeing from people all over the world. And you and I were talking a little offline before we started recording. It's amazing the impact that social media and podcasts and just videos online have made in the general health and well-being of people who historically have not gotten this information before. So we're in it together.
Yeah, great. And I mean, you know, the amount of experiences everyone's having now and the massive boom in fitness is great. And, you know, we can dissect and take parts of that are really going to be useful in our day-to-day strategies in managing diabetes and linking it all together. So I'm ready to go and ready to give you as much info as I can.
Cool. So you're one of those multi-hyphenates. You're an educator, you're a speaker, you're a trainer. Historically, you've been a competitive bodybuilder, and you recently added to that list author. Yeah. So you're definitely a busy guy. You're also the founder of Diabetes, Muscle, and Fitness. Now, your background in health, in nutrition, and fitness runs super deep. We can probably talk for hours, and I'm going to definitely want to have you come on at some point in the future to fill in blanks, because I know I'm going to get a lot of questions once we get this podcast out there. But what I'd love to do is use today really as a starting point and learn more about your story, and then dive a bit into some of the key areas we all need to think about when it comes to training and living a healthy life with type 1 diabetes. So maybe what we can do is just really start at the beginning. And I start with this question often because I think it tells a lot about a person, who they are as an adult. But where'd you grow up and what were you like as a kid?
Well, I grew up in Northern Ireland in a small town called Lisburn, which is just outside Belfast. And I know you Americans all love the Irish, so I'm sure many of you know where Belfast is.
Yeah.
That was the place where the Titanic was built. And long story short, I was an overweight kid. I wasn't massively obese or anything like that, but I was overweight and I didn't have any real interest in sport. I was fed a decent diet, but too much of decent food, put it that way. And long story short, I was diagnosed at 16 years of age. And I remember it very, very clearly. And automatically when I was diagnosed, I can remember some of the phrases and terminology that the doctor was presenting to me. And the way he was speaking and the way he was communicating with me at the time, there was a lot of words like may, could, potentially, possibly. And my 16-year-old brain clicked on to the language that there was a chance with this. So whenever I started to hear some words like diet, lifestyle, major focus on these particular areas, I began to place a very high value on diet, lifestyle, and obviously the whole medication side of managing diabetes, because I knew that those were my keys to living a good quality life. They were my keys to preventing complications, and I built my education and awareness around those specific topics. So it was sort of like a survival instinct that really kicked into me, and I became hyper vigilant and paranoid about reading as much information as I could about all these particular areas. And if I look at my lifestyle before I was diagnosed, I mean, a typical 16-year-old, I played too much video games. Like I said, I didn't eat too much processed food. I just had a lot of good dinners, and we were eating out quite a lot as a family and things like that. And there was a lot of lack of activity. So that automatically changed, and I placed a high value on exercise. I placed a high value on structuring my day with my nutrition, and also collecting data. And what I mean about collecting data, we didn't have CGM back then. It was basically a notepad, a pen and paper, and I was tracking meticulously my blood glucose levels in response to set meals and set dosage of insulin. And I was trying to time it perfectly all the time. I was trying to find this perfect dosing schedule. It never really happened because I began to realize that stress, sleep, different types of food, combinations of food, there were so many intricate factors that were mixing up with, my predictability in terms of what I was actually taking from the assessments. And over time, I did this for multiple years. And, I began to observe patterns. I was consistent with my eating. I tried to keep things consistent as I could with my exercise, my lifestyle. And over time, I was able to sort of craft this perfect sort of diabetes management protocol for myself. And I remember at the time working with my health professional team, and in Northern Ireland, we work off a general health service, so it's not really like private care. I do have private care now, but on top of that, with the general health service, when I was first diagnosed, you're basically just a number, and you're in every 6 months for a checkup, and there's no real accountability in between. And they thought that I was just running off a set insulin dose protocol, and I was working off a set amount of carbohydrates per meal. But the reality is we've got life to live with, and we have day-to-day changes in our circumstances, in our appetite, in our environment that lead us to eat different things and eat at different times. And we sometimes have physical activity that underlaps, and there's various different intricacies in our day-to-day behavior. So the reality was that sticking to a set insulin regime for a set diet was never going to be sustainable. So, like I said, all this data collection really gave me a good, solid background as to how my body was responding to my medication and things like that. Now,
so let's back up for 1 second, because there's a very interesting thing that's kind of embedded in all of what you're saying. You're 16 years old. You're just diagnosed. There's a lot of information that's kind of potentially floating out there from your doctors and healthcare providers, and there's a lot of uncertainty because, look, at the reality is that we don't quite understand how diabetes is going to interact with any one person's physiology, their lifestyle, as you're just finding all of these different variables that are entering our lives. Where do you think that kind of drive to get so specific and so kind of in check with your diet, nutrition, diabetes, where do you think it came from at the age of 16? Because that's a very mature thing to kind of do at that age.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I was 16, the first thing that I was presented with when I was diagnosed, I was brought into a room and I saw pictures of amputated legs, I saw neuropathy, I saw all these complications on the wall. I think they were physiology posters for the diabetes education team. And it basically put a lot of fear into me. I also didn't like the way I felt. I didn't like the way my vision was at the time. Obviously, one of the first signs of diagnosis is blurry vision. And I always prided myself on having 20/20 vision. And I hated the fact that I couldn't read number plates, the fact that I had to really focus my attention on reading billboards and things like that. And I knew, looking at everyone in the diabetic ward at that particular time, that there was a very low level of energy, that there wasn't much hope, and that the physical sort of state of everyone in and around the waiting room where I was, and just the general sort of vibe, it didn't sit well with me. And I said to myself, this isn't going to be me. And it was basically driven by that. And over time,
fear is a pretty good motivator.
Fear was a massive motivator. And, what began to happen was when I began to read, when I began to understand, when I accepted that I wouldn't be perfect initially, I realized that over time I started to feel better. I started to be able to anticipate fluctuations in my blood glucose levels, and I was able to achieve more, and I built up confidence. And every single time I got it right, that was a brick of confidence. Every single time that I got it wrong, I said, right, we're experimenting, we're learning. So I had built that from the outset. Now, I can honestly say in my entire existence with diabetes that there hasn't been once where I have been frustrated with my condition, and I've reflected upon that a number of times and asked myself, surely you've got frustrated once. You've been annoyed, you've been upset when you've taken a hypo, you've been annoyed when you've taken a high, and the reality is there actually hasn't been, because I also fell in love with bodybuilding and strength training at the time. And that was a complete flip opposite of what most people with diabetes were doing.
That's right. Yeah,
I
let's
considered,
talk about that actually, because if anyone has actually seen pictures of you, and I want to understand how you got into the gym in the first place, but if anybody's seen pictures of you when you were in prime competitive shape, there was no lack of muscular development, and I really want to understand. Maybe you can give us an idea where it all started for you when you started training. What got you into that gym? Clearly, there's the motivation of I don't want to end up like these other people in the waiting room when I'm going to my endocrinologist, but there's got to be another drive there as well. What else was really pushing you into that direction?
yeah, that was a massive drive. And I mean, like I said, whenever I first started learning about nutrition and training, I started practicing, I started attempting and trying, and I noticed an automatic improvement in how I felt, in how I looked, and how my blood glucose levels were behaving. And don't get me wrong, that initial starting out point of building muscle and getting into the gym was very frustrating, with a lot of highs and a lot of lows. And as I began to learn more about bodybuilding and associate my goals with building muscle and maximizing my muscular development and strength, which at that age as well, at sort of 16, sort of 18, when I was going through puberty and turning into a man, I associated muscle with strength. And then that was compounded by the fact that I didn't want to be a weak diabetic. I became hyper vigilant and paranoid about putting on muscle and, developing this strong character. And I realized that one of the main side effects of hyperglycemia was catabolism of amino acids and breakdown of muscle tissue. So I was absolutely paranoid about going high. Every time I went out of range, I said, right, you're breaking down muscle. And whenever I added that to my personal values on top of competing on a competitive environment, the fact that my job and career also relied on the fact of how I looked and how fit I was and how strong I was, it all cohesively tied in together to really make me hyper focused on that goal of building as much muscle as I could. And you could say the flip opposite for hypoglycemia as well. I didn't want to take a hypo because I knew that was going to impair exercise performance. I didn't want to consume the extra calories that were associated with eating food outside of meal times to correct blood glucose. And we all know what it's like when we take a hypo, especially when we're in the wrong environment and we don't have access to straight glucose. Anything will go. So that's other stuff we can talk about. The confusion between hypos and appetite and hunger and a whole host of things. And a lot of people with diabetes aren't aware of all this stuff. So I mean, a lot of this came from my bodybuilding knowledge, my fear, and the fact that I was seeing results. And there's nothing that trumps results. And I was coming in and getting my blood glucose assessed after 6 months, my HbA1c and all the readings, and everything was squeaky clean. It was perfect. They were concerned about my weight, but again, they were disregarding the fact that I had been putting on muscle tissue. And over time, as I built a relationship with my healthcare professionals, they understood what I was doing. The proof was in the blood work and the biomarkers. I was happy. I was consistent with my management. I was educated. I knew what I was doing. And yes, there were a few things along the lines with a few dietitians popping up and saying about protein intake and things like that, which we can get into. And there's a lot of counter arguments and a lot of things in context that aren't really taken into account in respect to health professionals and the likes of protein intake and supplements like creatine and things like that, which can actually be, in my opinion, beneficial towards a hard training, well-controlled diabetic that maintains a healthy body weight. So, we can talk about all those kinds of things. But as you can see, there's a nice amount of barriers in there to keep me within the lines in respect to building muscle and managing diabetes.
Yeah. What I would encourage everyone to do, and I'll also put some shots of you up on the page for the show notes as well. But if you take a look at what you did from a bodybuilding perspective, it's pretty remarkable, because even people who are not managing a chronic autoimmune disorder like diabetes would not look that way. And what you're talking about is the fact that, look, bodybuilding is a daily grind. There's no hacks, there's no shortcuts. You just have to get into the gym and you lift, and then you have to deal with all the other components, the mental components and the nutritional components, the sleep components, which I want to talk about some of those in a moment. But when you were kind of in the thick of it, who did you look to for inspiration and motivation to kind of keep you going back? Aside from the fact that you're internally motivated from keeping your blood glucose within the lines, who were the people out there that really
That's
kind of,
a very good question.
the easy answer is Arnold, but I think that's too easy.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be very, very truthful with this. There was no one. Back then, whenever I was that age, I can remember searching the internet high and low for individuals that were of a bodybuilding level, of a strength training level to that caliber, and I couldn't find anyone. And everybody that was diabetic was either a cyclist or a rower. I think you'll recall a British guy called Steve Redgrave, who was a famous rower for the British Olympic team, and he was the only sort of athlete that was, how could you put it, doing big things. And obviously that wasn't my goal. I didn't want to be a rower, and my main focus was muscular development. So, I mean, in terms of inspiration, there was nobody. It was a very lonely place to be. And, don't get me wrong, I was training in a great environment. I was surrounded by great knowledge. And I'd also been building my knowledge up from an academic level in terms of physiology, how the body functions. So I had a great understanding of, protein synthesis and frequency of training and knowing the importance of rest and respecting that. And don't get me wrong, it took me a lot of practical experience to learn the simple saying that less is more. At the start, we all start off with more is better, but as you mature and as you learn more about your body, you'll learn that less is more and its sustainability is a lot more important. But, with that, there was nobody, and that massive void in information was there. And I can remember, when I actually wrote my book, which we'll get into, I wrote that from the heart set and the mindset of when I was that age group, and I was writing to myself. So, with the amount of people that are into fitness now, males and females, and not just in Ireland, but in the States, I mean, you flick onto Instagram now, type in the hashtag Fitspiration or fitness, and there are millions of people that are chasing a healthy lifestyle. Look at the applications like MyFitnessPal, pedometers, Fitbits. The growth in fitness is crazy.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So I didn't have anybody, to be honest, Craig, and to be honest, none of the healthcare professionals at the start supported it. I was told actually to avoid weight training. I was told to avoid eating the way I was eating, and mother and father also bought into the healthcare professionals' opinion, and I didn't get much support from my family as well, because they thought it was unhealthy, and there was a whole lot of misconceptions about it. So, but I firmly believed in what I was doing. I was researching, I was being responsible, and, I dedicated my whole entire life to it. And, fitness and strength training is, it's my career now. I've become internationally known for it. And again, we could extract mindset elements for this, but, never run away from who you are, and you got to believe in yourself and continue to do what you think is right for you. And I stuck to my guns, and, the diabetes and the bodybuilding, the passion for that led to an academic degree in university. I went to study clinical nutrition and everything I could about food. Food fascinated me. Nutrition fascinated me. I was much more interested in nutrition than I was exercise. But with my degree, we looked at all aspects of clinical nutrition right through the exercise physiology, and then I furthered that on into sports nutrition. And I was just acquiring so much information. I was just churning through it and trying to extract, right, why is my blood glucose behaving when I consume this type of protein? Why is my blood glucose response high whenever I do this particular type of activity? Right, what can we do to combat this? I was always asking myself questions. And I think that's very important as a diabetic, for all of you guys listening, that you place a high priority on asking yourself questions every single day. Why did my blood glucose behave like that? What did I eat? Did I mismanage my dose? Did I miss out on sleep? Again, if you understand all the principles about healthy living, sleep, stress, nutrition, exercise, and you can relate all your questions back to that in conjunction with an understanding of diabetes, and it doesn't have to be massively complex, you will be able to pinpoint why your blood glucose is behaving in a certain way. And the reality is you have a choice to do it or you don't. If you don't do it, you can expect to die sooner. I'm just going to say it straight out. That's just fact. And you can expect the quality of your life to be very, very poor. On the other hand, if you want to achieve things, if you want to be productive, if you want to be able to be in a good mood, then you have a duty to ask those questions. And mood swings are probably one of the biggest things that I do struggle with diabetes from time to time. And we're all the same whenever our blood glucose levels can fluctuate at certain times of the day. And we all can wake up high, and we know what that's like sometimes.
Yeah, of course.
Especially for the start of the day. I mean, that's one thing that really drains my productivity.
You know what I love about what you talk about is the fact that you're coming at this from a perspective of a scientist, a highly educated scientist. You're looking at it from a research perspective. You're looking at it from a practical knowledge-based perspective. And what you're doing is you're putting this all together and you're helping everyone understand that, yes, there's some common threads that we all have to be very much aware of. And these are the things that you've experienced. But everybody has to take a look at their own specific situation and say, look, maybe I'm a little different than Phil might be because, look, my body type is different. I'm not exercising quite as much, whatever it might be. But you're coming at this from a coach perspective, and I said at the top of the show that you're a coach and a trainer as well. But we also mentioned the fact that you're the founder of Diabetic Muscle and Fitness, where a lot of the stuff that you're talking about right now, if anyone is really interested in, again, I'm going to put this in the show notes, but if they go to your website, they go to your YouTube channel, they're going to find a lot of kind of heartfelt, very impactful videos from you. That are talking about a lot of these concepts. So where did the concept for diabetic muscle and fitness come from? Was it simply because you couldn't find, again, what you needed out there? Or was it there was a higher calling here?
Yeah, well, I mean, when I was speaking at an event probably around about 2.5 years ago, I noticed up until that point I was getting a lot of random emails from people across the world saying, I hear you're diabetic. Can you help me with this? I heard you were diabetic on this radio show. I heard you were diabetic on this YouTube channel. Somebody mentioned to me you were diabetic. And then I came off stage at this event and there was a queue of people and about 90% of them were diabetic and they were all asking questions. And nearly every single one of them said, you need to do something with this. And that was when I had the penny drop moment and I spent a year writing my book. And my first book that I wrote. And if you've ever written a book before and you're listening to this, you will know how challenging it is. And I spent the whole year putting that together, researching and writing and trying to look at it from the perspective of somebody who was wanting to build a better body with diabetes. And like I talk about on Diabetic Muscle and Fitness, it's for people that want to build stronger, better looking, healthier versions of themselves. And they do that with good quality information that is evidence-based where possible, because there's a lot of information, a lot of science that hasn't even delved into looking at type 1 diabetes and strength training, type 1 diabetes and building muscle. It's not a priority for the majority of scientists to go and research that. So I have to pull a lot of information and research from people without diabetes, combine that with people with diabetes of the research available, and then look at the general body of evidence and knowledge base on physiology and tie all of that together. And I'm very clear in the book, and you'll have read it yourself, and you'll see that there's parts where, I openly say that there's research that doesn't exist in relation to this, but we can only propose. And I'm very clear about that. And there's nothing that I'm saying in absolutes. I don't claim to be a guru. I don't claim to be a know-it-all. I'm a lifelong learner, and I make it very clear in the book about the different aspects that are outlined in that. And, in that respect, that is what really got me to put together Diabetic Muscle and Fitness. And I wanted to create a community for individuals all over the world that love building muscle, that love weight training, that want to build a better, stronger functioning body. And at the same time, be able to manage their diabetes effectively and efficiently. And, now the book has gone out. The membership site for Diabetic Muscle and Fitness is being built, and I have a great guy that actually reached out to me probably about 6 months ago, John Pemberton, who'll probably end up listening to this show, who's been an absolute wealth of information. And he is also type 1 and a dietitian, and is also massively into endurance training and strength training. And, we have put together such a quality piece of information. I mean, we've even got stuff on all the research around insulin dosing and meal times and mixed macronutrients. It's extremely detailed stuff, and try to tie that into the context of people that want to build muscle mass and people that want to lose body fat. And, if you look at the majority of diabetes exercise information out there, it's very feeble, it's very weak, it's very generic, it's very boring. It's not context specific, and it's written by people without diabetes that can't relate to the emotions, that can't relate to the mindset, that can't relate to the frustrations. It's also written by people that don't have an understanding of nutrition science or exercise physiology, most likely just editors. And it's bland, it's untasteful, and quite often, if you go the other side of the route for the research-based stuff, it's too clinical, it's too complicated, it's not context-based, it doesn't take into account day-to-day living or other circumstances or contexts. And the problem with the fitness industry in general, not just in the diabetic world, is the fact that everyone looks at things in isolation. And you will probably understand this within your healthcare practice, that people will come to you and they'll mention one hormone. And they'll say, well, my cortisol was high, and my such and such was high, or whatever. And they blame everything on that one hormone, or something that they've read on Google, or something they've read in an article. And when you actually look at physiology, it's extremely complex. There's multiple factors that go on.
There's so much interaction, of course, yeah.
Exactly. And, people don't, it's very easy for, people will come off with blanket statements and say, I'm not losing fat because I've got high cortisol. I'm not losing fat because I'm hypothyroid. And they haven't even got a clinical diagnosis. I mean, people are very quick to assume nowadays. And again, it's very important that we look at the underlying factors of nutrition, training, and lifestyle management. For starters, people don't get enough rest. People don't manage stress effectively. People don't look into major considerations with calories and energy balance. People don't stick to diet plans that they can sustain. And that's one of the biggest things that makes individuals struggle with their fat loss. Most people, when they talk about a diet or a strength training regime and they have hopes of changing their body, you'll hear things like this. When they're in the middle of doing it, they'll be like, it's only 10 weeks until holiday. It's only 5 weeks until the wedding. And they put a timeline on their results. And the reality is they haven't set their nutrition or their training or their fitness endeavors up for lifelong success.
Yeah,
and that requires looking at things, appropriately.
Ultimately, it's not a lifestyle change. It's a goal to get into a bathing suit to look better on the beach sometimes. Yeah. So what's interesting is, and I'm holding the book in my hand. I picked it up a while back just in preparation for our conversation, and it's a beautiful book. It just feels really good in your hands. It's chock full of so much incredible information. Whether you're someone who is a novice in the world of diet, nutrition, lifting, fitness, or if you're someone who really wants to dig into the real heavy science-based stuff, the resources are tremendous in here. But what this got me thinking of as I'm reading this, and I know that, look, I've been dealing with type 1, and I've been lifting to a certain extent and staying fit for many years at this point. Clearly not at the level that you're doing it and have done it. But there's common obstacles that a lot of type 1s, I'm guessing, who are lifting and trying to stay fit probably have in common. So what have you seen in your coaching, with your coaching hat on, some of the biggest obstacles in mindset or physical performance or nutritional know-how that your clients are coming to the table with? What are the common threads?
Yeah, well, common threads for males and females of 18 years, 17 years, or right up to 40. There's going to be a couple of common threads in relation to blood glucose control for a start. We'll start with diabetes, and then we'll delve into the more major sort of fitness stuff in a minute. But looking actually after your blood glucose levels and understanding why you're going low and understanding why you are going high. So one of the biggest problems with weight training specifically is individuals who go in to train with a normal blood glucose level and then come out high. And when they come out high, they see their blood glucose is above normal and they can't understand because they haven't eaten anything. And they do that multiple times and they get frustrated. And then they say, diabetes sucks, this training makes me go high, I'm avoiding it. Secondly, we see other things like exercise driving blood glucose low when somebody's got too much insulin in the background. And again, all those kinds, those two circumstances in particular are going to really disrupt somebody's happiness and fulfillment that they get out of exercise, because obviously nobody wants to exercise when they're low, nobody wants to exercise when they're high. And the results of exercising with mismanaged blood glucose levels are going to be suboptimal. So it's very important to realize that whenever you strength train, there's a high probability that your blood glucose levels will go up if you haven't eaten within 2 to 3 hours of training or taken any insulin within 2 to 3 hours of training. And the reason for that is because of the nature of the type of training. Strength training in particular is high intensity training. So without going into too much science, it will involve the release of glucose from your liver. And in individuals with type 1, that is one of the biggest issues whenever it comes to glucose control, is the body's own production of glucose. Carbohydrate is a non-essential macronutrient, and the body has the capacity to manufacture it itself. With someone with type 1, they lack the insulin to recirculate that or put that back into the muscle cells and control that. And as a result, it builds up in the blood. And when we do stressful things like strength training, or we get stressed out for a prolonged period of time throughout the day, or we get an illness and we have stress in our bodies, our liver tends to release glucose into the bloodstream. And there's a whole lot of other circumstances and stuff that go on, but I'm just talking about the liver in general. And again, people who do not understand the physiology of diabetes do not account for this with their bolus. They do not account for that on an acute basis of when they're stressed. And it's very hard for a healthcare professional to say, look, you need to dose when you get stressed at this time of day or whenever this circumstance appears, because it's going to happen at various different times of the day. And also the fact that you've actually got a diet to consume, which again has acute variations in how you manage your blood glucose control and how you inject insulin and things like that.
And also stress, there's not a gram or sort of measurement that you can actually account for when you're dosing. Right?
No, and I mean we've all been through. We're all susceptible to stress, and you will know, like myself, there's a massive difference between a car pulling out in front of us rather than hearing a personal tragedy or a business related stress, which can be chronic and ongoing throughout a day. And there's a massive difference in how blood glucose levels can behave. So it's very important to understand what the body does under stress. It's very important to understand what your insulin does as a medication. It's very important to understand what macronutrients can do to your blood glucose levels, and then exercise. So if we look into things like stress, we've got emotional stress, we've got lack of sleep, we've got illness or infection, we have exercise, particular types, especially strength training. We then look at simple things like acute blood glucose control with medication. We've got bolus, which is rapid, fast-acting insulin used to accommodate stress and food. And then we have basal, which is the background insulin, temporarily keeps the liver under control. Again, it depends if you're on pump therapy or what you're using, but I use multiple daily injections, so that's what I go by. And then we look at other things like the macronutrient composition of a meal. Carbohydrates are going to have the greatest effect, depending on the type of carbohydrate. There's going to be a massive difference between glucose that you will get in a confectionery sweet or a bottle of Gatorade, I think it is, you guys drink, compared to the likes of something from fruit or an apple, which tends to have a smaller effect on blood glucose levels. And then we'll see things like protein. We'll see leucine-rich protein. Leucine is an amino acid. Protein is made up of different little amino acids. And when we look at the types of protein that we have plant proteins and animal proteins. Ideally, if you're strength training, animal proteins are the best. But if you're vegan, then you have to look at accommodating different types of animal or different types of protein sources to get the full spectrum of amino acids. But protein sources that are particularly high in leucine have the potential to increase blood glucose levels. So one of the greatest protein sources that is going to have the greatest effect on blood glucose levels is whey protein. That's because of its leucine component. And again, there's a different reaction between whey protein consumption in type 1s compared to type 2s.
So do you not suggest someone who's trying to build, because look, whey protein is probably one of the most popular powders that are out there in terms of supplements, and we'll talk about supplements in a moment, but is that something that you suggest that we stay away from or be aware of with our dosing, with our insulin?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say stay away from it. I mean, whey protein is probably one of the highest quality proteins that you can consume. Plus, as well, if you've got a good quality whey protein, there's a ton of other nutrients in there and nutritional properties that are going to be beneficial for health. But if you're poorly managed and you don't quite understand your body or your nutrition properly, then it might be best just to stick to whole foods. But if you're a well-controlled diabetic and you have your blood glucose levels managed and your calories are all in check, you can most certainly consume whey protein. I personally don't consume whey protein because I prefer to get it from food.
Sure.
The only time I will take whey protein is when I'm in a rush or I don't have the appetite to eat food, such as when I'm really focused on my business stuff and I'm working and I just don't have time to prepare food. Generally speaking, I prefer to eat whole food. And, whey protein can, sometimes after training, I don't feel like, a chicken breast or a portion of meat. I just want an ice cold shake. It really depends on personal preference, and having that flexibility is freedom and
Sure.
knowing when to choose between the two. Fat also has an impact on blood glucose levels, depending on the type of fat. Trans fats in particular, which are pretty much not available now over here, can have a big effect, and saturated fats tend to have an effect on blood glucose levels much more than the likes of omega-3 or polyunsaturated fats, but that's getting really advanced.
No doubt, no doubt. So let's actually dive a little bit into. I want everyone who's listening. Look, you're giving such a massive amount of information, and I know that look, this is a very complex picture, and the amount of research that you have put into this and the knowledge base that you have. I want to make sure everyone is not just depending on this, this brief podcast to get this information, because they can go into the book, they can go to your website. We're going to have follow-up conversations to talk about some key points here.
But the book has so much information, and the website as well. I'm putting up an article every single week, and some of the articles are 3,500 words. 25, 30-minute reads. There's the videos on YouTube, which there are literally about 40 stockpiled and ready to go out. I put out so much free information out there. There's the Facebook group, which is opening later this month, and there's a wealth of information out there. And like I said, I don't claim to be a guru. I'm literally going off what the current evidence base is, what information and literature is out there, the experiences of myself in coaching people with diabetes. And also, I think it's very important to realize that my experience in coaching the general public is also important, because the day-to-day circumstances that they're exposed to are also similar in people with diabetes. And, I have coached and seen it all, from the overweight mother of 3 right through to, the overweight guy at 18. So, there's a vast range of different life experiences and values and everything. And again, like, if I can stress, the main thing on this podcast is to, like I said earlier, ask yourself good quality questions and realize that it's your duty to control your diabetes, and you can't complain about your diabetes if you're not going to take ownership of it.
That's right. We have to take ownership of our own condition. We can't blame anyone else for our circumstances. So here's the thing that I'd like to ask you, because there's a couple of key things that have come up in my own mind when I'm thinking about whether it's bodybuilding, fitness, nutrition, and I'd love to get your thoughts on these specific topics. And there's 5 kind of hot topics that I think I've identified. The first one is, and without getting too deep in the weeds necessarily, and I realize that might be difficult because this is a huge question, but one of the myths is that someone with type 1 diabetes just cannot gain muscle mass, and clearly that's the exact wrong statement. You're a case in point. But why can it be hard for so many type 1s to build significant muscle mass? What are the factors that we face?
Okay, this is a recipe for not gaining muscle. Run your blood glucose levels as high as possible. Don't strength train. Do loads of cardio. Undereat. Avoid protein at all costs. Be stressed out all the time, and don't sleep.
Yeah.
If you don't want to build muscle, do all of that. Okay? On the other hand, if you want to build muscle, do the following. Obsess over perfect blood glucose control. And that's a catchphrase that I sort of coin on the website and in all the content that I put up. Obsess over perfect control. We typically talk about obsession being a bad thing, but obsession with diabetes and perfect control is everything but good. So when we look at obsessing over perfect control, we are not subjecting ourselves to the damage that we're doing to our body, which is going to conflict with our exercise performance and our health. The healthier you are, the more muscle tissue you will put on, because your cardiovascular system will function better, your hormones will function better, your mind will function better. You need to strength train, you need to provide the muscle tissue, you need to provide the body with a reason to grow. And when it comes to strength training, you need to structure your training in such a way that, one, you train the muscle tissue across the body in the sense that you use movements or exercises, without getting too complicated, that incorporate or recruit multiple muscle groups at one time. You need to progressively overload that. So what that means is over time, you should be lifting heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier, or more weight. That doesn't necessarily need to come in the form of kilograms or pounds per actual set, but we can also look at things like increasing the reps or the sets. I'm sure most of you guys understand what that is. We need to understand that sleep is very important. It's a prerequisite to high performance living. It's a prerequisite to strength training. We need to understand that nutrition, especially protein intake, is absolutely paramount in individuals that strength train. And this is a big gripe that I sort of have with the information that's given out on protein intake in people with diabetes. If you're poorly controlled with diabetes and you have kidney issues, then yes, 100% you need to be very careful with your protein intake. However, take into account if you strength train, your protein demands increased. If you have diabetes and you're poorly controlled in the sense of very, very rarely or across the course of a year, you're more uncontrolled than somebody without diabetes, your protein intake or your protein turnover is going to be higher. And when we look at hyperglycemia as an actual medical condition, it decreases or reduces protein synthesis, and it increases muscle protein breakdown. And it's the balance between those two interactions in the body that is then leaving the amount of muscle tissue that's left. So if we have an increased level of protein synthesis and a reduced level of muscle protein breakdown, we end up with more muscle tissue. If we have an increase in muscle protein breakdown and a reduction in muscle protein synthesis, we lose muscle tissue. So we have to look at the processes that support increasing muscle protein synthesis: regular strength training, adequate protein intake, rest, ensuring that our blood glucose levels are managed. Whereas if we want to increase muscle protein breakdown, what we do is we run our blood glucose levels high. And for those of you that don't know, diabetes is actually a condition of what we call undernutrition, in the sense that the body doesn't actually use the fuel. It ends up leaching it out through the urine, through all sorts of different ways and means. And what happens is the body does not actually build muscle tissue like it should. So in a nutshell, if you're looking after your rest, you're consuming enough protein, you're strength training regularly, you're managing your stress, you're ensuring you get all the other important macronutrients and minerals, your essential fats particularly, your minerals, your hydration, you're good to go. And back onto that point just about protein, just before I forget, when we look at most people with type 1 diabetes that maybe need to lose body fat, we have to look at protein as a food. It's very filling, so it allows us to reduce our calorie intake, which is one of the biggest, most important factors whenever it comes to fat loss. It also as well costs a lot of energy to digest, and the fact that it builds muscle tissue, which is very metabolically active, which basically means you burn more calories at rest and more muscle tissue you have compared to fat mass. So, you know, there's a lot of principles to have in place there before you even, you know, start pointing the finger at anything. So, yeah.
Yeah, so that's great. So, and you actually touched upon the second and third kind of hot topics, which were supplementation, especially with protein, and then also sleep. But what I'd like to talk about, there's a hot topic nowadays, and there's philosophies like anabolic fasting, which have become very popular in recent times. What are your thoughts on diabetes, on fasting, and how it might actually help us or maybe hinder us from building lean muscle mass?
Yeah, well, I mean, I actually fast. I do quite a lot of intermittent fasting, and you know, the way I work with my intermittent fasting is pretty simple. I mean, I fast first thing in the morning, and I will fast until around about midday, around about 2 o'clock. I get up at 5:30, 6 every single morning, and what that does is my blood sugar levels basically sit like a rock, and that's due to a lot of the stress hormones that are produced first thing in the morning, and they help stabilize my blood glucose level. And at this particular period of time, I'm trying to lose body fat. And if I look at my window from 2 o'clock to 10 o'clock when I go to bed, it's an 8-hour window to eat. So my eating window is compressed, which helps me facilitate fat loss, because obviously we can only eat a certain amount of food over a certain period of time. 2, it allows me to get more stuff done instead of like cooking meals and preparing stuff. 3, I'm much more ready for the meal whenever it comes to actually eating. And in terms of exercise, I plant that bang in the middle of that, just after I've had my first meal towards my last meal. And when we look at consuming a large meal right before bedtime, the actual satiety of that, the actual I'm not going into the whole chemicals that are produced, but we can feel quite lethargic after that. So it sets us up perfectly for evening time. But again, making sure blood glucose levels are controlled the whole way throughout. And again, it's just a tool. It's not it doesn't necessarily mean that it's 100% bulletproof. It may not work for individuals. Individuals may find they get too hungry initially and can't sustain it. Individuals may find that they over-inject insulin, or they can't understand why their blood glucose levels are going high. Don't get me wrong, when I fast, I still have to inject insulin to accommodate adrenaline spikes from maybe a small amount of stress, or if I have a cup of coffee. Again, caffeine is a stress agent. Yep. It's a stimulant, and I could have a coffee and I could maybe need to take 2 or 3 units. So again, there's aspects there that really need to be taken into account.
Yeah, no doubt. And look, I know your time is short, and I want to be very respectful of that. I just have a couple more questions for you, because
sure.
you got my mind kind of just going here. And maybe I can ask you one more question about diet and nutrition, and then we can move on just to some final questions. Ketogenic diets, they've become massively popular in recent years, especially with kind of the explosion of CrossFit. Ketosis, that's different than ketoacidosis. What are your thoughts on getting into ketosis?
Yeah, well, I mean, in an individual with type 1, it's very hard because obviously we're using an exogenous drug like insulin, which can drive blood glucose down and put us into a hypoglycemic state, which in turn needs to be rectified with carbohydrate consumption to bring us out of that. So from a social perspective, that's very hard to do. Also from a medical perspective in relation to the actual insulin, it's very hard to do. When we look at strength training as an actual endeavor, it relies heavily on what we call the glycotic system for energy. So it requires a lot of carbohydrate. And, whenever you are trying to fast, you're limiting one of the main sources of energy that you will use for strength training performance. And the body has to create its own carbohydrate through various different ways and means. We've got, conversion to gluconeogenesis. We've got a whole go of different chemical processes that go on within the body. And I think in order to get into that ketosis state requires, a monk-like state of living, which is not sustainable for 90% of the population. Yes, in terms of ketosis, we see a reduction in appetite because the ketosis can blunt hunger. We also see the fact that we're just generally removing an entire macronutrient from the diet, which at 4 calories per gram is going to allow us to eat less.
Sure.
And when you look at a lot of these diets like paleo diet or a low carb diet, we're just basically eating a lower calorie controlled diet. It's just a different way and means of doing it. And like I said, I personally don't think it's valid for individuals with type 1, especially on medication. And that leads me to another thing. I mean, having been on Facebook and stuff like that, I've become aware of particular Facebook groups and communities. And obviously, when I started writing the book, I mean, I wasn't interested in joining any type 1 diabetic communities. I was doing my own thing and within the whole fitness industry. And obviously, I've got more sucked into it now because I've written a book on diabetes. But to see the ignorance of a lot of individuals that are advocating one way to eat and one way only, the low carb movement would be an exact example of that. You try telling an 18-year-old young guy who is strength training 6 times a week to eat very low carbohydrate, high protein, high fiber diet and try to build muscle and gain weight.
Yeah.
And it's simply out of context, and to ignorantly say that is the only way to eat and almost be offended if somebody eats differently, and yet you've no evidence to back up your claims or actual clinical understanding of what's actually going on with inside the body. And also taking into account personal taste and preference. I mean, if I can enjoy, food has such a massive social aspect to it in terms of preparing it, eating it with our families, right through to going out for a meal out, right through to enjoying the taste of it, right through to traveling and trying different cultures and different foods. And if I'm going to restrict myself a macronutrient because somebody in a Facebook group said so with no real evidence, I'm going to really make my chance of sticking to the diet and sustaining to it very, very stressful.
Sure.
So, you have to take that into account. If blood glucose, the way I see it is this: if I can manage my blood glucose levels to the point where I'm pretty much in range 95% of the time, I'm lean, I manage my stress, I sleep well, I eat a colorful diet, I eat a mixture of different protein sources, I get my essential fats in, I learn and read a lot to understand what's going on within my body, I connect with other like-minded individuals, then I'm doing pretty damn good.
I'd say so. So, Phil, where's the best place for everyone to find you online and to learn from you?
The best place to find me online would be diabeticmuscleandfitness.com. For all of you guys on Facebook, make sure you look up Diabetic Muscle and Fitness. The Facebook page has just been set up the other month. There is a Facebook group which is not opening until the end of September. And there's going to be a lot of like-minded individuals. So, Craig, I'll have to get you in there.
Yep, definitely.
I'd love you in there. And it's going to be opened up. And, the group is basically going to be revolving around a weekly theme of, workout of the week, recipe of the week. There's going to be live videos, webinars, all that kind of stuff. And the membership site is launching towards the end of September too. We were going to launch it in August, but I'm just hyper fussy with the content and chasing up a few interviews with a few researchers and things like that. And, putting a membership site together, just to give you guys an idea, it's around about 4 to 5 hours per every 1 hour of content produced in terms of reading it, researching it, making sure it's clear, writing it up and recording it, and then getting whatever graphic designed and putting it up there. So there is a lot of work to it, and the membership site is extremely inexpensive for the amount of information that you guys are going to be getting back. And, it's a wealth of information of, other individuals living with type 1 that want to literally build the best body that they can with all the time they have left in this world. And, I want to connect everyone across the world. And, another buzz phrase, if you want to call it, is of the website that you don't live with diabetes alone. And, when I was younger, that's one thing that I thought that I was living with it alone. Craig, I don't know how many people in your local neighborhood that have diabetes, but I'm sure it's below 4 or below 3 probably. Yep. So it's very important that we collectively come together. And, at the end of the day, some of us are more skilled in certain aspects of health and fitness and whatever other trade it is you're in the world than others. So if we can learn from others' experiences, mistakes and lessons and passions, then so be it. So
sounds great. Yeah. And also the Diabetic Muscle and Fitness Guide, which is your book, is also available pretty much anywhere. You can get it online, you can get it on Amazon.
Yeah, you can get it online or Amazon. Most people actually order it just from the site, diabeticmuscleandfitness.com.
Okay.
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all of those bookstores. It is being published in Australia towards the end of December and India as well. So, yeah.
That's tremendous. That's
pretty
great.
Extensive guide. And like you said, it's fairly detailed. Actually, there's a few people that wanted me to write a little bit more about my own personal journey in it, but I didn't think was that famous enough to do a biography yet. But it seems like a lot of people are very interested in my personal management of diabetes, and I keep explaining to them that, look, listen, that's entirely unique to my circumstance, my weight, my lifestyle, and if you can understand the principles of diabetes, which pretty much everyone needs to know, but not many people do, then you'll have a far better chance at controlling your diabetes rather than looking at somebody else's way of managing, because my life is different, my circumstances are different, my motivation is different. So, Craig, thank you very much for having me on.
Yeah, one last question for you. I know that you have to run. What is your definition of the word brave?
My definition of the word brave is realizing that you're pretty much responsible for everything that happens in your life, how you respond to circumstances, how you deal with conflict, how you deal with opportunities, where you are right now as a result of, what you've done on average, and accepting that and looking into that constantly and saying, right, what do I need to change? What do I need to refine? And life is like a piece of clay. I mean, you have to constantly refine it. You constantly have to be moving. You constantly have to be dynamic. You constantly have to expect change. And, like I said earlier on, constantly ask yourself questions. Am I happy? What have I learned from this? Why has this turned out like this? What can I do about this? What has this led to? And, if everybody realized that a lot of the circumstances in life that lead you on to other things, whether that's relationships, whether that's careers, whether something negative happens, whether something positive happens, there's a lesson in all of that.
No doubt.
And I think that a lot of people don't look at that lesson. A lot of, let life just sort of, I think it was Tony Robbins said, life just happens for them, you know what I mean? Instead of, them actually making a good go at it and using all the feedback. Nobody really pays attention to themselves. And especially if you live with an autoimmune condition like type 1 diabetes, I mean, you're not going to get complications if you look after yourself. If you keep your blood glucose levels in perfect control, you're going to be at a far less chance, if any chance, of getting complications or getting your foot cut off or going blind or all this crazy stuff that is put out there. I mean, if you can obsess over perfect glucose control, minimize that, partake in all the activities that, you know, are cohesive with a high quality life, you know, you're not going to end up like that. And I mean, I think that's a very important thing for people to realize. I think when people are diagnosed with diabetes, they automatically think they're going to go blind. They automatically think they're going to lose a leg. They automatically think that if they cut their foot, they're going to get it amputated. You know, it's very easy to overthink these things, overcomplicate them, and add a lot of unnecessary stress and burden to your life, when the reality is you have options and opportunities and decisions to make in front of you that are going to help prevent that. So that's the best thing I can share.
Phil, thank you. I know you got to run. I want to thank you very much for being here today. Thank you so much for all the amazing information and the energy you're putting out into the world. Definitely making a huge impact with what you're doing. I'm psyched that our paths have crossed, and look forward to talking again soon. So thank you so much, Phil.
Thanks, Craig. I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
We'll talk soon. Take care.
Bye, buddy.
All right, everyone, there you have it. A lot of information there, and I hope you were able to grab a bunch of keys that will get you thinking about your own nutrition and fitness. You guys definitely have to check out Phil's website as well as his book, which is the Diabetic Muscle and Fitness Guide. I'll include links to Phil's website and where you can get his book in the show notes for this episode, so head on over to thebravestlife.com/012 for all that information. As always, I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of the show. If you like what we're doing here, please be sure to share this episode with someone you love. Again, the link is thebravestlife.com/012. And one last thing, if you're into the show, and if you would just take a few minutes now to head on over to iTunes and leave a review. At this point, there are a handful of 5-star reviews, and I really appreciate those of you who gave your seal of approval. But for everyone else, if you're up for it, leaving your own review helps others find us, so we're able to spread this message to a much larger audience. So again, head on over to iTunes, leave a review. I'd be massively grateful for that. Okay, guys, check Phil out online, check out his book, and all the great stuff he's putting out into the world. I want to thank you again. I'm Craig, and we will catch you next time on the Bravest Podcast.